most of your time just to work on stuff. All right, so there's three basic kinds of errors. Does anybody know what they are?
Syntax error.
So syntax, or what they often call it, is compile errors. So these are things that won't let your program, you can't even run until you fix them, right? So if you have a compile error, let's do, I'm just going to make that like that. Compile errors usually have, you know, like a red underline in here. And if you hover over them with your mouse, it'll say something like, boy, that's hard to read. I should zoom this. The type or namespace data table could not be found. All right. So the thing that you should take from that, I'm going to zoom. Right. So when you do this, what kind of clue can you take from that? It can't find that. Why can't it find it?
No, it hasn't been defined.
It hasn't been defined because you've got a typo in it. You're right, a typo is enough for it to not exist, to be something else. And it is case sensitive. So a lot of the times, so data table, yeah, and that's the error. If I did this as, say I did this as TBL1, again, I get an error because it doesn't know what this is. It looks a lot like this, but it's not the same, right? A lot of your errors on the compile time, there's a few things. One, oh, no, I don't want to, I want L. A lot of them will be typos, right? The other thing can be a missing semicolon. So these are all compile type. Here's something for those of you that are new to C#. It is an instinct when you start putting semicolons to put them everywhere. But this is this when you put this here, this one has an underline, and most everything down here has an underline, and everything after it has an underline. So if you look at the error message, it says that data class get services must declare a body because it is not marked abstract. That may be a bit confusing, but it means that you've closed off the method without a body, right? You can't close off the method there. That's a common mistake when you're first starting because there's an instinct to put a semicolon everywhere. All right, I'm going to make, does that make sense? One of the things is look at, look at where the error is and just try to locate it. Don't panic. I think that one of the reasons why I have to run so much from seat to seat, and I'll probably do it today too, but just as a, is that people panic when they see an error. Don't panic, they're normal, right? No matter how good you are, the first couple of times through, you're just fixing the typos and the errors. There's another thing that you can, I'm going to just real quickly remove this. All right, so actually that didn't cause too many errors. Let's remove one in the top. Or you know what actually would make it even better? Yeah, let's put an extra one in. Let's put an extra one right here. And again, this is really common. Now, it doesn't seem to throw a lot of errors, but notice it can't see the connect object. And there's other errors too, like there's an error down here on this. When you look at the connect object, it says that the name connect does not exist in the current context. And you wonder, well, that doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. You look at read data. Read data does not exist in the current context, which means this whole method doesn't exist in the current context. Because we've, by putting this extra curly brace in here, this method is now outside the class. You can't have a method outside of a class. If I tried to compile it, it would give me even more errors. Like, so if I try to run it, I should get a whole bunch of errors. There were errors. A couple of things about this. when it says, would you like to continue? Generally say no, right? Because if you say yes, what it does is it goes back to the last time it worked, right? It's not running what's currently there. It goes back to the last time it worked. If it never worked, it'll tell you there is no good build. So you say no, and then at the bottom, you should have an error list. If you don't have this, you can go to View and then View Errors. And notice it has expected class, delegate, enum, or struct. Basically what that's saying is if I double click it too, if I double click it, it pops up to here. Let me move up. The cursor pops into here. Why is the cursor here? Because that's what where the error is. This is, you can't have a method that's in outer space, basically. It has to be inside of a class. And that's different than Python. Python, you can just write methods. But in C# and Java, they have to be inside of a class. C++, you can write them like that outside, like Python. So the problem here, and the thing that none of the errors quite tell you, is that we have an extra curly brace. Curly braces will cause lots of cascading errors. So a couple of just general quickie advice on the compile time, because I don't want to take too much of your time. Always handle the first error first, because a lot of times the second error was caused by the first error. And if you have a whole list of errors, sometimes when you correct the top one, they all go away. You know, so start at the top of the list if you're doing that. So those are compile time errors. There are also runtime errors, and I'm going to create a runtime error. I'm going to go into the web config, and I'm going to combine data source into one word. I'm doing that because I do that a lot. It's one of my common errors when I'm typing it. After programming for a lot of years, I ram words together all the time. I have to look at my normal English and make sure I'm not ramming words together. It might work better if I was German. I don't know.
Yeah. Or else they say your Greek background.
Yeah, they combine a lot of, they just run a lot of stuff too. So I'm going to run, and it's going to throw an error in runtime. So that's another kind of error, is a runtime error. And notice it crashes right here on the string, okay? So the connection string, because the connection string is now wrong. So it tends to crash. It doesn't always crash where the error is, but it usually is close. So if I go down here, we have all of this. Now, one of the things that it says, really all we need to know is that keyword not supported data source, right? Why is data source not supported? Because it's not the keyword, it's data space source. You can also, I just want to show you, you can view the detail. And it gives you, you know, like the messages there. There is a ton of information that you can get here. And sometimes you really can't tell what the error is unless you open up the detail and go through all this junk. So not all of it's useful for you. But this one's fairly easy. Keyword not supported data source. So what I need to do is stop running, go back to the web config, and change that back to data source. Now, sometimes, like if I change this to SQL Express, which is actually what you probably should have on your laptop or whatever your server name is. When I go here, it's going to give me a slightly different error. Notice that it crashes on open. Why does it crash on open, do you think?
Because it's
Connection is not right.
so
Right.
it's attempting to access a database that doesn't exist on that server.
Right, and it doesn't, so that there's nothing wrong with the string, right? It's just that the server name is wrong. And it doesn't know that until it actually tries to open the connection. So if you have errors in your connection string that aren't typos, it's going to crash on the open. every time, right? So if you have the wrong server name, if you have basically the wrong authentication, something like that, it's going to crash on the open, because that's the very first time that all that code that we did, none of it's doing anything until this line right here. So it tends to crash on the line where it's first activated. The error, though, so it just says cannot open community assist. The login failed, right? And you can go into the detail. And again, sometimes the message is good enough and you don't know to go into the detail. You don't need to do that, but sometimes it's needed to do that. So again, the correction for this error, if it breaks on the open, then the problem is in the connection string, right? So if it breaks on open, the problem is in the connection string. So I'm going to turn that back to SRv38. If you go home and use SRv38, it's going to crash, right?
Unless you name your.
Unless you name your own, yeah. All right, one other thing I'm going to show you, and then I'll call it good for, because this is the other common error. So I'm going to go back to the data class. And what I'm going to do is I am going to change this to just grant date. All right, so that's not the name of the field. Now, one of the problems with SQL is it's just a string. It can't test it until it runs it against the database. This is get grants. Well, that's all right. So let's run this. Now, notice it gives me these. And I can do medical. And then it crashes. And where it crashes is down here with the execute reader, because this is the first time it's running the SQL string. Right, it's where it's running it. The command object is running the SQL string against the, the database when it does the execute reader. And it says that there's an exception, and it also gives you that there's an invalid column called grant date. Right, so it's fairly obvious that that's what the error is. You have an error in your SQL. If you have any errors in your SQL, they're going to crash here. Okay, so I'm just going to fix it again. And you might have to go look up the database to figure out what it is. Okay, so those are runtime errors, because those errors don't occur until you're running, right? And then the last kind of error, which I'm not going to talk about now except to mention, are logical errors. Logical errors don't cause the program to crash. It's just that you're getting the wrong answers. Those are really hard to trace sometimes. There could be lots of reasons. I mean, even your math could be right, but the scope of a variable could be wrong. There's lots of things that could cause, or your order of operations could be screwed up. There could be lots of things that could cause a wrong answer that don't throw an error. The computer doesn't know what you want it to do. It just knows what you did. Okay, does that work? Are you guys ready to? So all I ask is try to solve the error on your own. If you can't, I certainly will come help you. All right. All right, the troubleshooting is a primary skill, right? It's when you're actually out in the work world, it's a core skill. It may be even more of a core skill than actually coding. All right, so I'm going to kill the video and this Zoom and go ahead and work on it, and I will come around. This one is actually, although the code is complicated, what you need to do to make it work in your assignment is fairly simple. So.